I was looking at my LPs earlier and decided to give myself a challenge just to go through them 10 at a time and share them with you. No filtering, no putting anything in order, including the guilty pleasures and the rock classics. So I did my first 10, and I'm going to move on now to the next 10. So this is a guilty pleasure. Swing Out Sister, It's Better to Travel. They were big in the early 80s, and great pop, jazz, real sophisticated, kind of hipster sounding pop back in the 1980s. That song, Breakout, love that song, and I have to admit, I really love this whole album. Guilty pleasure, but I'm gonna own it anyway. I might even listen to it after I finish these reviews. The second album, The God of Life by John Michael Talbot. If you were in the seminary back in the 1980s, you had at least one John Michael Talbot album in your collection, or you knew a lot of John Michael Talbot songs. I bought this one because of the song Healer of My Soul. It's a beautiful song. There were guys who could play the guitar and sing it at prayer services in the seminary. A great song about the soothing nature of God's mercy and love. So if you're struggling with something, I'm sure it's on Spotify. Healer of My Soul by John Michael Talbot. The next album is another John Michael Talbot album, but it's a duet with his brother Terry Talbot. And this is The Painter. It's an Advent reflection album. I love this album. I look forward to Advent every year because I can get out The Painter and listen. Some awesome guitar work on here, multi-layered harmonies, beautiful tunes. They really embody that spirit of Advent hope, that sense of early dawn waiting for the light to come. Great album. I would highly recommend that anytime, but especially during Advent. The next one is a classic in my family's history, Peter, Paul, and Mary, 10 Years Together. This was my mom and dad's album. They are huge folk fans, and so when we were kids, listening to folk music was just one of our favorite things. So Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Seekers, the Kingston Trio, the Chad Mitchell Trio, Pete Seeger. My mom and dad were heavy into folk music, and we all can sing several Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. We might even be able to harmonize on a couple of them. Another Elton John album, I think I got this at a thrift store as well, Madman Across the Water. Again, as I said, you just can't go wrong with Elton John, especially the classic albums from the 70s. Tiny Dancer, a great tune. A tune that I've come to love more in the last 6 or 8 years is Leave On. Never really got into that song, but for some reason, it has really grabbed me in the last 6 or 8 years. So Elton John's rich catalog just continues to be fruitful and blossom if you keep listening to it. So much good music that he and Bernie Taupin have written. The next album is an 80s band called Blanc Mob. I really got into them for a while, and I love this album, Mange Tout. Kind of a fun cover, first of all, but the song Don't Tell Me, great start to this album. A lot of synth and pop tunes on here, and probably more of a Euro pop feel. I love the singer's voice. It's kind of this weird, haunting voice. It adds a nice texture to all their music. Finally, an album by the Cars. The Cars were big at my house growing up. My sister got into them first, and then my younger brother Steve and I started to listen to the Cars and became huge fans, especially Candy-O and Panorama and Shake It Up. I think Shake It Up was the last album that my brother Steve and I were really digging from the Cars, but those middle albums from them are real classics, so I love Shake It Up. Now we're talking Van Halen debut album from the 1970s. They were one of the quintessential LA rock bands from the late 70s, and this album I think is probably still their best. You Really Got Me, Running with the Devil, Eruption, all these classic tunes are on this debut album, and they were bad boys, and they certainly embodied the heavy rock scene from Southern California in the 1970s. The next one is an 80s band, Bow Wow Wow. Some of them were from the former Adam and the Ants, and you can certainly hear the sonic connection in terms of the drums. Annabelle Lewin, the lead singer, was just a fun 80s figure. So Do You Want to Hold Me? Some other great tunes on here. They were always a fun listen. This is a classic from Depeche Mode, Black Celebration. It may be one of their less popular albums, but I read that for fans, this is in some ways the quintessential Depeche Mode album. In keeping with the title, it is pretty dark. Not that Depeche Mode were ever super cheerful, but this is a great album. I think Fly on the Windscreen, yeah, is on here. Lots of good tunes on Black Celebration. The last album is a B-52s album, Bouncing Off the Satellites. Not one of their more popular albums, but some fun songs on here. Girl from Ipanema Goes to Greenland. They always had a little sense of humor about their music. And I personally love the song She Breaks for Rainbows. I think it's a funny image, first of all. But there's this blissful sound to that song, and it's a fun album to go back to. So that's the second 10 in my journey through my LP collection.